Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. My name's Amy, and I'm the Digital Content Manager here at MorePay. Today's topic is attracting and retaining talent in a post-pandemic world. Now, before we get to that, there's a few things to cover. So first up, how to ask a question. We've got a live Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we're really keen to hear from you. So drop your questions in this question panel as we go, and our presenter and expert, Michelle, will do her best to answer as many as she can. If you're facing technical difficulties, please use that same question box. If I'm flooded with questions, then I'll know that there's a problem at our side and I'll do my best to fix it. Don't worry too much if you're facing your own technical issues. The webinar is being recorded and I'll send the recording to you by close of play today. So what are we going to cover? Okay, so first up, post-pandemic working models. Then we're going to look at changes in priorities for candidates. We're going to look at top tips for attracting talent and best practice hiring processes. And we're then going to look at engaging and retaining employees and the reasons employees leave. And then after that, we'll wrap up with the live Q&A that I've mentioned already. Okay, so I'm just conscious that we've probably got a few people on the webinar who aren't MorePay customers. So I'm just going to do a quick intro on MorePay and then we'll get going with the webinar. So MorePay provide payroll and HR software and managed services to UK businesses. We've got more than 10,000 customers now across the UK, and you can see some of our customers there. It was actually our 55th birthday last week, which was very exciting. So we've been around a wee while. Our promise is making payroll and HR easy, and we do that by focusing on these 4 things. So a simple onboarding, because we know that switching, people can find it quite stressful, and so we have a team of experts to help with that. Easy to use software, rich functionality in our software, which means it's packed with lots of features, and finally, flexible services that are delivered by our team of payroll and HR experts at MorePay. So that's enough about us. Let's meet your presenter for today. So Michelle Hobson is our HR Services Director. She joined MorePay back in 2017 and has more than 15 years of operational and strategic HR experience. And of course, she is CIPD qualified. Good morning, Michelle. How are you doing?
Good morning, Amy. Thank you very much. I'm good, thank you, on this well, quite grey, miserable morning from Manchester. But other than that, all good.
Lovely. I will move on to the next slide and we can get going.
Fabulous, thank you. And good morning to everyone who's on the call then. So in terms of the subject for the webinar, I think we all know that there is a real shift at the moment in terms of recruitment, and the pandemic has changed a lot of things. There are lots of jobs out there at the moment, and I think probably most people on this call will be feeling the pinch of candidates versus jobs, and that it really is a bit of a candidates market at the moment. So hopefully we can talk through some things today for you to think of as a business that will help you stand out from the crowd. Now, one thing I do just want to say before I go into the detail of it is that sometimes we will go through some quite general areas of recruitment, and I know that one size does not fit all. And completely acknowledge that. So for example, when I talk about hybrid working, I know that will only work in certain industries, in certain jobs, in certain sort of situations, but hopefully this will give you a flavour of the sorts of things that you can look at in terms of your business. So the first thing that I want to really touch on is just to sort of pause about how the pandemic has affected recruitment and how the world has changed. And I guess without trying to sound dramatic, but given we are, well, I was going to say we've come through, but we are still in the midst of a global pandemic, I think probably there is a little case for dramatisation. But I really do think that life as we all knew it pre-2020 completely changed, and something that none of us could have ever envisioned in any parts of our lives, and it is touched every part of our lives. And it's just important to stand back and acknowledge that for the people who do work for you and for the people that you want to work for you in the future. And one thing really is that the past 18 months have made quite a lot of people evaluate what their priorities are, what their values are, what they're looking for in work-life balance, and that has changed. And therefore, us as employers have to not just acknowledge that, but try and change with it. So for some workers, the pandemic predicted kind of gave them that shift in priorities and encouraged them to change jobs. What was their dream job? Was it worth just sitting and waiting in a job that they didn't really enjoy? Now was the time to change. It's meant that some people have decided, actually, I'm gonna, I don't know, give up work and go and be a stay-at-home parent, because there were so many of us, myself included, juggling the whole homeschooling whilst working scenario. But for some cases, unfortunately, the decision to leave and change jobs actually came from the way that they felt their employer had treated them during the pandemic and how they handled it. And for those people, it's kind of putting a focus on, how's this company that I give a lot to in terms of my sort of time, my energy, my resource, what are they giving me back, and what have they done during the pandemic to support my health, my happiness? And you're finding that people are changing the way they think about it. One thing that we will look at is that a lot of candidates are now increasingly looking for a different way of working, for flexibility, to allow them to benefit from more family time. I think the very fact that a lot of us in industries where we were home working, or for those who were placed on furlough, that did change our lifestyles for quite some time, and where home working happened, we had to make it happen, and you know, in most cases it did work. So that then begs the question, do we just go back to the way life was before, or do we acknowledge this shift? And a lot of candidates are now looking for that increased flexibility. But I think one thing to point out is that analysis from Social Enterprise Timewise has actually found that still nearly 3/4 of UK job vacancies do not mention any kind of flexible working, and we'll come on to what that may look like in the future. Despite the fact that there's been a real shift in working styles as we're kind of coming out of this pandemic, and offering some flexibility is going to make a difference in attracting the best candidates, attracting a diverse workforce, and it makes good business sense. Pay is one way that we attract candidates, and it's always been very high on the list, and it is still on that list. Pay is obviously an important aspect, but I just think it's important to recognise that it's not the only aspect that people are looking for now. They're looking for a wider thing, and I think this quote from Forbes here is really quite an important one, which says, after a year, much longer than a year now, of crisis, uncertainty and soul searching, people do have a clearer idea of what they're looking for in a job and won't settle for anything less. And especially given the conditions in the marketplace at the moment, with abundance of roles, candidates have that choice. And hopefully this will give you some ideas of where you can think about how you stand out from that crowd. So talking about then the hiring process and onboarding and what best practice looks like, a lot of this is stuff that you will already know and have already done over the years, even before the pandemic, but it is really important to review these and make sure that you are putting the candidate experience first. This is the first impression that a candidate will get of your organisation, and although you are looking for the right person's also looking for the right job and the right company. So if we just go into the next slide, then I'll talk you through how you can look at putting the candidate experience first. Obviously, there is the interview process. And a big thing about the interview process is keeping those candidates well informed during that process. There is nothing worse for candidates than them having to chase on where things are up to. So make sure that there's a real proactive approach to it. And that comes with clear communication, setting out expectations, what timeframes will look like, when you will get to those decisions, and how the candidate might expect to see that. I think for all of this, though, we acknowledge that the way we've interviewed has changed as well. During the pandemic, there were, lots of companies, yourself included, who hired people without meeting them face to face, being able to be more flexible with online recruitment, video calls. And I think some of that will be here to stay. Actually trying to find a date where someone can take a few hours out of their day if they've already got a job to come into the office. It might still be easy for them just to take an hour to do an online video interview. So I would still encourage you to think of those flexible ways to interview people and encourage people to apply. I think when you get to an offer, when you've been through the interview process, you've communicated with the candidates, and you come to that job offer stage, again, it's about acting quickly on that, following up from the interviews with the feedback quite quickly and offering that candidate. And then once you've done that verbal offer, the most important thing is having that in writing to confirm the job offer, because that's when they can put things in motion with their existing employer now. And the way that things are changing in terms of software, look at how you do that job offer process. I think probably gone are the days where you send out a huge contract via post. What can you do electronically? Is it via email, or have you got kind of an onboarding system where everything can go out automatically, can be e-signed? Think about what that process looks like. It's also important to remember the unsuccessful candidates, and where possible, and I know this isn't always possible where you've got hundreds of applicants, say in a hospitality industry, or you might have done a graduate programme where there's hundreds of applicants, but where possible, think about following up with the unsuccessful candidates with the feedback, where their skills gap were. And also an important point to note is if you have people who were potentially a close second, you know, let them know that, because you may need them in the future. If they came a close second to one role, you don't want to completely switch them off for the way that you told them they were unsuccessful, because you want to encourage people to apply again just because they weren't successful for this one role. Think about how you have treated them, how they've gone through the process, and therefore how you'd re-engage with them again. And then it's good practice to allow the candidates to review the process as well, particularly when someone has joined the company, asking them for their feedback on how things have gone and making improvements. But as it says at the top, this is all about thinking about the candidate experience, because the better the candidate experience, the more chance you've got of employing someone who is really engaged in this role, likely to stay and also likely to be successful. So moving on then to some top tips for attracting talent. If we just go on to the next slide, these are just some call outs really to think about. Again, none of this is rocket science and none of this is probably new to you. I just think it's really important that we revisit this in the current climate that we're in. Remember that the quality of your workforce does determine how the business performs. It sounds really simple and really obvious, but sometimes we need to remind ourselves that. And it's how it performs across all departments, from sales, quality of service, delivery of service, and how our customers are treated, and therefore how our customers feel about us. And this really does start with the job description. It's the first time a candidate interacts with a company is when they're reading a job description. So think about what you want that job description to say. Yes, there will be a list of tasks that that person will need to complete, and you need them to be aware of that. There will be a list of qualifications and requirements that you will want that person to have, and experience you want that person to have. But how do you wow them with the company culture? Why, when there's two jobs of the same, why would they go for your company over another company? It isn't just now about the job title or the money. There are so many things around that you can work on. One of the things that I will talk about soon is things like hybrid working. Now, as I said before, I'll caveat it again. Hybrid working is certainly not suitable for all jobs and would not be considerable for all industries. But hybrid working is now a benefit that people will actually seek in a job role, particularly where they have worked from home during a pandemic. Most people who've been in that situation know that there's some balance to be had, and to be effective in your role does not mean you have to be in an office 5 days a week. So look at that. Is there something that you can encourage? And then, as I said before, make sure their first impressions of the company are still good ones by communicating the interview process clearly to candidates and keeping them up to date as you move through the whole process. On to the next slide then is just to take a little bit more time to talk about flexible working. As I said, I'm conscious I don't just want to talk about working from home or hybrid working, where a bit of time in the office and at home. And these just are some of the examples of flexible working that most industries could consider in one way or another. Part-time working, it's something that's been around for a long time, and it's something that you can look at again, but with a different lens now we've been through the pandemic. So obviously this is working less than standard basic full-time hours, and pay is usually reduced because of that part-time working. So what roles have you got that could be part-time? How would that look? How would that work? Where would the rest of the work go? Are you going to open up your candidate pool to a much wider pool if you encourage something like part-time working? And those are the kind of questions we need to ask ourselves. It's not limiting ourselves to a smaller pool of candidates and not considering the wider picture. Working from home, whether that's all the hours working from home or just part of the hours working from home. As I said, this is something that there's a lot of people who've got used to over the last 18 months and is some kind of hybrid model of part office, part home going to work in the future. What does that look like for your existing staff, and how can you use that as a potential encouragement to people who are joining? I think just by default, and because none of us had a choice, we've learned a lot as a society about how working from home can actually work, the things that we can put in place to make it work, and a balance between working from home and office may be a way to go. Another take on kind of part-time working is job sharing. So where you've got a role that you know can't be done in reduced hours from basic full-time, is there an option to get two people to share that job, working opposite ends of the week or different days, and splitting that full-time job between more than one employee? Is that an option for you? Some businesses are looking at compressed hours, so where you work still the standard full-time hours, but you compress that into fewer days. So you might split your, I don't know, say it's 37.5 hours in a week, you might split that over to Monday to Thursday, and people may not work the Friday. That's another option, something that is becoming a bit more increasingly common. And there's been some really interesting studies on the impact to productivity, which is actually positive, and a positive impact to engagement, where you're reducing the working week to something like 4 days. Flexi time, obviously that's where there's flexible start and finish times that are set around core hours, so you can still service your customers, but you give your employees not an actual dedicated time they need to be in, allow them that bit of flexibility at the beginning of the end of the day. So you might have people who prefer to come in quite early, up with the dawn and the birds, or people who prefer to come in late, do a school run, and work a bit later in the evening. And then the other option is looking at annualized hours. So this is flexibility to work a set number of hours per year, and it is up to that individual how they do that. So they might compress it into a shorter amount of time. There's lots of things to consider with each of these. There isn't one answer. There certainly isn't one size fits all. This is just about encouraging you to think about these different options, and you may end up having a number of these even within one organisation because it fits different roles. For example, working from home isn't going to work where you need a restaurant, a waitress in a restaurant or a waiter in a restaurant, but job sharing might work, or you might be able to do part-time working. There are things that you can consider. So it's looking at the options and thinking how you can change to this changing candidate market. And just to kind of finish off on this is talking about some of the benefits of flexible working, which is on the next slide, and really just thinking, why are these things good for your business? And the main one here is the thing that we're talking about. It really can aid recruitment. It will help you attract and retain a more diverse talent, and probably a wider talent pool as well. If you're being very restrictive in your job specifications, then you will restrict that pool of candidates. So think about how it will benefit widening that pool. I think overall we have to acknowledge that a better work-life balance is often more appealing to employees than a salary these days. It's not the same in every case. Salary is important, but it is another consideration for people, and it can help reduce your recruitment and turnover costs in the future. There's also a benefit to increased engagement. So employees who benefit from more flexible working arrangements are likely to be more engaged and therefore increase their output. And it's about helping them work smarter. So it's not about working long hours. It's about how do you help them work smarter, and happier staff lead to a more engaged and productive workforce overall. Obviously, during the pandemic, we've had a huge focus as society on mental health. the situation that we're all thrown into was so almost sudden, unknown, just completely different to anything any of us had ever experienced before, and probably could have ever imagined. If you'd have told us in the 6 months before what would happen, it would have been very hard to imagine. And there's been a severe impact on people's mental health, and this is for different reasons. So whether this is somebody who works full time, who was finding juggling homeschooling small children a real challenge alongside their job, whether this is someone who lived alone and therefore didn't have kind of lost their support network around them in those early days of lockdown, where you really weren't even allowed to see one other person. How did that impact them? There's been so many different scenarios that have impacted people's mental health, and a better ability to balance home commitments alongside work commitments will mean more concentration when they are during working hours. And there's a proven to employees' mental health around reducing stress and fatigue, which often leads to underperforming and issues in work. So flexible working can help with that. And then just overall about maximising productivity. It allows employees to play to their strengths, and flexible working means that employees can work when they feel that they're at their most productive during the day. And again, this whole don't work hard to work harder, work smarter, I think that's a really important thing to recognise. And that, you know, bottom line, it can help reduce absence, lateness, costs, and anything associated with that. On the next slide, one of the other things that we wanted to talk about was employee benefits. So again, when you're thinking about the recruitment market and how you attract candidates, attract the best candidates, and then once the candidates are here, make sure they stay, it is thinking beyond just pay, which was in the past. Now, a lot of progress has been made over the last few years with employee benefits, but it's worthwhile raising this again in the context of where we are now. And I guess the question is, what do you have in place that support employees beyond work? Years ago, and I do think things are changing and things have changed during the pandemic, but there was very much a mindset in business to almost, and I'm generalizing here, work like you don't have a home life or a family, almost put those to one side, forget they're there. You're here to work hard, you're here to work long hours. That's the sign of a good employee. Now, thankfully, those days are moving on, and businesses are recognizing that offering help with things outside of work, things that put stress on an individual that might have nothing to do with work, but we are human beings at the end of the day, and the list of things that you see on front of you, if they are happening in your home life, are going to start trickling into your work life. It's very, very difficult to completely separate the two. So, you know, looking at the things here around health screening, dental screening, cancer plans, helping people get fit with cycle to work, gym discounts, and thinking about all the family issues that may be impacting people, whether that's something like debt, even buying a home. That's a very stressful situation, even though it's exciting to get a new home. The things that happen in the run up to it are incredibly stressful. And then looking at employee assistance around support for any kind of confidential issue, whether that's personal or work related, mental health support, emotional support, financial support, recognizing that all these things that are going on in people's lives behind the kind of the walls of work, whether they are four walls in an office building or virtual walls at home, recognizing that these things impact how a person performs in work and putting things in place to help them with it is going to positively impact engagement, going to help productivity at work, and it will help you overall with attracting the right candidates into the role. So then just to kind of finish off then, there's a few things that I want to go through around engaging and retaining employees before thinking about the reasons that people leave. So to talk a little bit more about hybrid working, because obviously this is the buzzword at the moment, and although we've kind of touched on it about working from home and working from the office is one option of hybrid working. So I think new normal is different for everyone, and we keep hearing this phrase, but it is a new normal for us all. but some kind of hybrid or blended approach to working is being embraced by many businesses after lockdown, and they're seeing the benefits in this. So if we think back to lockdown when employees were told to work from home if they could, I mean, we went into a situation, all of us businesses who had to implement that, we didn't have a choice, it had to work and we had to make it work. But sometimes when your hand is forced to make things work, you actually see things that you didn't expect to, and the various benefits that have come from this. So hybrid working is now a benefit that we think people will actively seek in a job role going forward, where that job role allows. So there's a wide lot of research that has been done on this, and I think there will continue to. We're still in the early days of this, but a YouGov survey indicates that the majority of workers, where this is an option, will want to continue to work from home for at least some of the time, and businesses have to recognise this. So a recent survey found that about 83% of workers would be much more likely to apply for a position if there was a more flexible way of working, like hybrid working. And as I mentioned already, this absolutely broadens the talent pool, and I think this is just all about the new world that we've entered. Another important thing to remember is just onto the next slide around learning and development and developing your employees. So there is obviously a big thing you need to do up front in terms of attracting the right people, making sure you've got the right setup, the right working environment. But once they're on board, just remembering that developing employees, especially kind of high potential employees who are very ambitious, it's a key to retention. What career development have you got in place that also supports your organisation's succession plan? Have you got a learning management system in place that will help train and develop, that is going to attract, retain and develop that key talent? And what effective and engaging and relevant training can you introduce that will motivate employees and develop their skills whilst improving their productivity? It's a balance of making sure that you're bringing the right people in, you're developing them in the right way, but what's the kind of the benefit to the business as well? Because obviously I'm talking a lot about candidates here because I'm talking about how to bring the right candidates in, but this is all with a mind of how it will benefit your business in the long run by getting the right people in with the right skills and them staying there. But I think, you know, it's important to call out, a lot of research again has been done on this, but companies that invest in skill development can boast something like a 24% higher profit margin, whilst comparing that to 40% of employees who've had a poor training experience will leave their job within the first year. It's just trying to balance all these things, opening up all these doors for you to come up with the most effective recruitment strategy for your organisation. So the last thing I just want to touch on before we go to Q&A, as I imagine there'll be some questions on the back of this, is just really to kind of close this off, is to leave you thinking about the reasons why employees leave businesses. And as I said before, right at the beginning, one of the things that we've got to remember what's happened in this pandemic is sometimes employees have left businesses because of the way their organisation treated them during the pandemic. And you as employees have got to be aware of that when you're going to get candidates coming forward. They may not have had a good experience of how they were treated during the pandemic, which has made them make that change, and they're looking for a better experience somewhere else. You've got to remember that employees are the key to an organisation's success. So if we as businesses don't have happy and engaged employees, it's going to make the success of the organisation a lot more difficult. And things that could put off a prospective employee is fast turnover of staff. If there's a lot of turnover of staff, that can indicate to a prospective candidate that the organisation isn't very well managed or isn't treating its staff right. If you have found yourself in a situation where you've had quite a lot of turnover and you're conscious that candidates might see this, but you know what the reason is for it, and you've either put things in place to change that or it was a particular spike, my advice would be to be honest about it and confront the matter up front. If there's something you can do to reassure a candidate that poor turnover isn't something they need to be worried about, then talk to them about it. If people leave and there's high turnover, obviously productivity and business performance are not going to be positively impacted. It will have a negative impact. And in general, employee turnover is likely to lead to a loss of experience and staff who are familiar with the business. and it can be quite a difficult thing to get back on track. It's not impossible, but once that happens, it's reacting quickly as well. Why are people leaving? And that part of that comes with having a really clear monitoring of staff turnover. This should be a KPI that is monitored within your organisation. So if things start to change, that you see it quite quickly and can react and put things in place to stop it getting worse. Obviously, there are situations where separations or leavers end up in a legal dispute or things like an employment tribunal, and there's a huge potential cost associated with that in terms of settling, whether that's in or out of an employment tribunal, and these are things to bear in mind. But then obviously one thing we would recommend is finding out why people are leaving, what are the motives behind it, and this is all about the proactivity. There is always going to be turnover in an organisation, and some turnover is good because you are getting to bring in new talent, new ideas, change the way things are done, but you don't want it to get to that level that's unmanageable, that's going to create a negative connotation with your organisation. So having the data on people leaving, when they're leaving, and then the bigger thing of why they're leaving, and you get that from an exit interview, will really help you in putting in place an effective recruitment strategy. And I think that's all, so I'm going to hand back to Amy to see what questions have come in.
Yeah, wonderful. I'll just have a little look. So we've not actually had many questions through. So we have got about 10 minutes still. So yeah, if you've got a question for Michelle, now is your chance to drop it in the chat, and we'll definitely cover it. So yeah, drop those in. We have got one from Melissa. How do you deal with counter offers during the recruitment process?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one, and that's, you know, what we are seeing out in the marketplace is candidates are looking to leave their job, and when they apply for a role, accept it, and then go back to their current employer is upping the offer. It is a really difficult situation to handle, and there isn't one size fits all. It is all going to depend on the individual and the circumstance. You have to decide at that point as a business, is this candidate somebody you really want within the business, you really want to secure, and finding out what it would take to secure them. And if you can, and if it is down to money, then go with it. I think all the other things that we've talked around about benefits and flexibility, they may be other things that you can put on the table to make your organisation the most attractive one to come to. But then I guess the only word of caution I would add is if you end up in kind of a bidding war, to do be wary of that and truly try and get to the candidate's motivation. You want a candidate who wants to come to your organisation. So if you get into a bidding war, that's not a great situation to be in. So it's kind of make sure you're not going back and forth on it. I would take the information that you've got, make the decision on whether you want to counter offer that person, find out what it would take to secure them, and kind of make a decision and make your ceiling about where you're going to go to get that candidate, and then see if it works. But look at all the other things you can do other than pay.
Yeah. A question from Claire. Have you experienced a lot of no-shows during the recruitment/interview process? And, you know, I guess how do we sort of manage those?
Yeah, I am hearing more and more of this, and I think we've even experienced it within our own organisation when we're recruiting. That people are just not showing up to interviews or very last minute pulling out. I think one of the reasons for this is they're applying for multiple roles at the same time. I think things that you can do to prevent this, because it is hard once it's happened, there's not a lot you can do, but things that you can do to prevent this is really around the execution of your recruitment process. So if you put a job advert out, but it's a month or 2 months before you get back to somebody, and then it's another 3 or 4 weeks before you get round to organising an interview, and then a few weeks later so you get back with the feedback, that is going to maximise the chance of people not just no-showing at interviews, but actually dropping out further down the process. So I would really look at how you can make your interview process and your recruitment process slick and speedy but efficient, that will make a massive difference. Because if you've sat on a CV for X number of time, and somebody else hasn't, then they're going to go with the person who was quicker. So it's all about making that recruitment process slick, efficient, well communicated, and trying to sort of counterbalance those things. But there will have to be an acceptance that some people will drop out, especially in this market where there are more jobs than candidates there are. But the more you can do up front and the more efficient and open you can make that process, the better for you.
Yeah. A question from Jodie. Coming from a healthcare sector background, agile working is not always possible. What is the thing beyond agile working that candidates are looking for?
So yeah, it's a very good point, and that's the one I tried to make up front, that this won't fit all organisations. So care is a wonderful example of that. Obviously, hybrid working is not going to work there in terms of people being at home because they need to be on site. But this is where there is the option to think of other things in terms of ways of working. Is there an option to do job sharing? Could you have more part-time people, which will widen the pool of candidates and maybe attract more people to it? Beyond that, though, it is thinking about all the things around that you've got in place to support employees and make it an attractive place to work, whether that is the benefits package you put in place, whether it's the amount of holidays that you give to people, what are the other things that you can add to make it feel like a more attractive place to work? What's the culture like? Is the culture something that you can use to differentiate yourself from another care home or another part of the care industry, to make it feel like this is the place that people want to work? Flexible working is one option. There are still some things you can do, but it's looking at all the options around that, and thinking up front, how do we make this an attractive place for people to want to apply to, and then once they've applied, that they want to come to work. You kind of, going back to the question before, you almost want to convince that person that even if they were counter offered by their existing employer, that they've actually want to go and work for you now and are committed to doing that.
Yeah, similar question from Helen, who works at a charity or a not-for-profit, where basically, they're not in a position to offer high salaries, and so they are looking for other ways, other rewards to attract people. They do offer EAP and good pension and life assurance, but they're wondering if there is anything else that they could do to reward their staff.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are great options and great place to start, to have some of those fundamentals in place. I would suggest looking at the benefits more broadly, because there might be things that you can do that don't cost a lot of money to the organisation, but great value. So whether it is things like offering employees the chance to pay into a health cash plan, or just giving them access to different kind of benefits, whether it's a discount portal with cashback, that's always a good one for people, especially in the run up to Christmas. Can you give them help with savings and budgeting, the cycle to work things, the childcare vouchers, just looking at all those things and making sure that you've got a wide, attractive package. Again, there are still some areas of flexible working that you might be able to look at, like job sharing or part-time working, which will make things more attractive. And then just think about the culture and the way people are treated. Sometimes it does go back to the fundamentals of that if you can give a candidate a good impression of how the culture of the organisation is, that will also attract them to want to join your organisation. But that certainly the benefits are things that I would look at as well.
Yeah, definitely. Laura has asked us if there is a best practice approach to rolling out a hybrid work policy to ensure the right balance of at-home and office working.
Yeah, I think it's really important that when hybrid working is put in place between office and home, that everything's clearly laid out in a policy. So, for example, things like obviously how many days they're expected to be in the office and at home, how it will work in terms of the equipment they've got at home, where the workspace is. Because obviously when we were all thrown into the middle of the pandemic and had to work from home, we were in a BCP situation. So we all went into business continuity planning. We couldn't be in offices, so everyone just had to go home. That did mean, though, that kind of allowances were made for things Would hybrid working change that is a question that you've got to ask yourself. And I'll give you an example about people's workstations. You may have had people who had a wonderful office set up with a nice comfy chair. You may have had people working at dining tables, sat on couches. There were probably even people sat on bedroom floors working because of the way that the situation was and their home arrangements. So a policy is absolutely key to getting this right, laying out what the expectations are, where the responsibility lies. There is there is some forms of best practice. We do have a template that we can work with clients on. So if we take the details of that question, Amy, we can probably get in touch and maybe give some basic guidance. And then if there's any more guidance that they want or help with a policy, that's certainly something one of our consultants can do. We've done that with quite a few of our customers who've wanted to implement that proper policy. It's certainly good practice to have that policy.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, we'll pick that up with Laura separately. Okie doke. So a few more questions and then we'll wrap things up. But an interesting one from Melissa. So she says she's noticed a massive spike in salaries over the last 12 months. She's asking, do you think this will return to pre-pandemic levels? And have you noticed and experienced the same thing?
Yeah, I do think there has been an impact on salaries, particularly when we're talking before about counter offers. Because of the way the recruitment market is at the moment, when say if you're in the situation where you're getting an employee handing their notice and you don't want to lose them, because one, that you want to retain them, but two, how difficult it's going to be to recruit their replacement, the automatic thing is to go into the counter offer, an increase in salary, and I think that has driven salaries up, and we are seeing that remaining. In terms of trends in the future, it's going to be hard to predict whether that will come back down to what pre-pandemic levels were. I think it will remain for now whilst we're in this candidate buoyant market where there are lots of jobs and lots of options for people, and companies, in many cases struggling to fill them. Unfortunately, salary does default to one of the most quick ways to get people in, is offer them more money. So it's something for organisations to bear in mind, but I know in most cases there isn't an endless pot of money where you can just pay whatever a candidate requests no matter what the job is. So it's about being realistic, and I think there are things that you need to think about up front in your recruitment process. What are you going to advertise the job at, but what realistically would you be prepared to go to secure the right candidate? Is that budgeted? Have you got that money? And then just going back to all the other things around it. We do know that money is important to people and it always will be, but I think people have reevaluated their values, and there's people who are quite honest in saying, yes, I might be earning X amount of money, but I'm in a job that I do not like, working for a company that I do not like, who have not treated me well, and therefore I'd be prepared to take a lesser salary to get the things that I haven't got around the culture, around the flexibility, around the investment in me as a person. So I think it's just thinking about all those things whilst being realistic about what your budget is. But I certainly imagine that those slightly higher salaries will be around for a little while.
Yeah. Alice and Laura have asked similar questions here. So they're asking about, the best ways to recruit candidates, the best options, the best platforms, effective platforms for advertising vacancies. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I mean, it's all very dependent on the type of role you're going for, so it's quite hard to give a blanket answer. Obviously, it's doing your research on what job boards are the most effective for the type of jobs that you are recruiting for and finding out where you're going to get the most hits, because the best situation to be in is to have a lot of candidates apply for your job, because I think, we're even seeing this at the moment. We're advertising jobs and there's not many candidates applying because there's just so many jobs out there. So finding the right type of job board will involve doing some research. So if you have got a recruitment team or an HR team who can do that, get them to do the research on what job boards are most effective for that type of job. For example, if you're recruiting a high-level director, you're not likely to get the best out of an Indeed job board. It might be best going through a specialised agency who not only can put the advert out there for you, but can do some headhunting as well. So do your research on the type of job. You've got the job boards that you can go to direct, which is probably a cost-effective way, or if it's something that you want more support with that you haven't got internally because you haven't got the team to do it, then it's looking at defaulting to things like agencies. But it is all going to very much depend on the type of role that you've got, and where kind of historically those type of roles are placed and get the most hits. You know, whether it's LinkedIn or another job board, it's about doing the research.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. We've run out of time, so we are going to wrap things up now. I'm just going to point you to the Knowledge Centre that's on our website. It's packed with useful resources, a lot of blog content that covers some of the things that Michelle's talked about today. So go and have a look in there. As promised, I'll send you the recording and the presentation slides today, so you'll have that in your inbox later on, and hopefully you find that useful. So thank you very much for attending. We hope it's been beneficial. A massive thank you to Michelle, who is a wonderful host as always and answered a ton of questions there. So thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.